and I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. All right, 请放上. This is what we are in the Amida Sutras, the Zenith direction. And we talked about the pure voice Buddha, celestial King Buddha, incense fragrance Buddha, and fragrant light Buddha. All right. And where we left off last time was the fragrance light Buddha. And we had talked about the history and the rise of the Pure Land school. And now today we'll talk about the story about behind the Amida Buddha, the sources and the rise of the Amida Buddha. So based on an excerpt from Shankar Sita's book, A Survey of Buddhism, he mentioned that the Mayamaka Vada, which is like the middle path, which was really the revival, if you will, of Buddhism and turned into towards Mahayana. And Nagarjuna, the author of or the founder of this school, insisted upon the primacy of wisdoms. So up to until really Nagarjuna, Buddhism in India was focused primarily on wisdom and very little emphasis on devotion. And when Nagarjuna and his work, when he founded this new way of looking at Buddhism, it was shifting towards more devotional Buddhism. So Buddhism of faith and devotion never really evolved until it got to Japan and China, where it turned into its own school. So that was something really special, although there was already worship of Amida Buddha and Maitreya, Mila Pusa, Maitreya Yilak Botang. Although they were already worshiping Amitabha, but it was never really in its own school, its own form, until it got to China. Nagarjuna's spiritual insight in his work laid out two paths in Buddhism. One, you could call it a difficult path of self-reliance, completely on self-reliance. The other one was the easy path of dependence on the compassion of the Buddha. I mean, this is, maybe we say easy, but it's relatively easy compared to the difficult path. It's not easy, absolutely easy, because you still need to put some effort, and there still needs to be faith. For example, faith is not easy to develop. For you to dedicate your life into that study, that lifestyle is not easy. Therefore, we say it's easy, but it's not real easy. Easy here in terms of relying on the Buddha's compassion and help, as opposed to just your own. For example, if you're climbing up a mountain, it is easier to have the king or some sort of tools with you to help you. Like walking with a king is much easier than just relying on your own. If you walked for a long time and your ankles are aching, I mean, your body has some limitation. But if you have an external tool to help you walk the path, that is easier. So we should say easier path than easy path, because that leads to the misconceptions that I don't need to do anything compared to the difficult path of self-reliance. Right? So Nagarjuna is regarded as the first patriot, 主师, right? 导师, the founder of not only Mayamikas, but also was regarded also by the followers of other schools, like Jodo Shu, which is Japanese Pure Land school, and other schools as well. The difficult and self-reliant path consists of, according to Nagarjuna, the practice of the 10 perfections and the 4 abodes of mindfulness. And the easier other reliant path is simply the worship of Buddhas, of primarily in his book, Amitabha and Maitreya. So Nagarjuna was proponent, if you will, of the worshipping of Amitabha. Right? He didn't go into the details, but I want to elaborate a little bit more on the 10 perfections and the 4 abodes of mindfulness. Now, there are different 10 perfections. If you look at Mahayana, today I'm just only addressing Mahayana's 10 perfections, but there are also the 10 perfections of Theravada. So they're a little bit different. In the Mahayana's 10 perfections, you have, first of all, the first 6 are the same as the 6 paramitas, or 6 perfections. And there are a little bit, and then they added 4 more to get 10. The first one, whether it's Mahayana or Theravada, they're the same. The first one is the same. It's the perfections of generous giving. So that is the foundation of whether you're studying Mahayana or Theravada foundation, and that is perfections of generous giving. And the whole point of giving is to develop this positive attitude, this positive, lively, constructive environment to help one another. Right? The whole point of that generous giving is to create and to maintain this constructive, positive environment. And the second is the perfections of precepts, observing precepts, which is to safeguard one's body, speech, and mind to avoid causing harms to others. So really the primary objective of precepts is to avoid harm to sentient beings, to preserve life, if you will. The third is forbearance, perfections in forbearance or patience. And this is not to be perturbed by the harm that others may do to you, and the sufferings that they may inflict on you, the pain they may inflict on you. Here I'm not suggesting that we encourage others to commit to violence or to encourage violence. That's what I'm saying here. Of course, we should do everything we can to preserve peace and to provide that constructive environment, right? Just like the first 2 that we just talked about. But the third one is more like internal. Although, let's say you may stand up against violence, but in your heart, you don't have any anger against those who committed violence. You try to help to resolve violence without causing angers inside you. So that's observing forbearance. I mean, there are multiple ways of being patient. Sometimes being patient is what? To say nothing. Just to do nothing. That's one way. Or to be timid, that's a form of patience, but it's not a proper form of patience, and that's not what we're talking about here. The other form of patience is you may be very active about it, but there is patience of trying to encourage change for the better. Right? You are very active, you're very involved. You're not sitting back and relaxed. You're very active, but you spend hours, days, months, long duration, years even, to help somebody, to help construct a project, to make sure it's successful, that it will bring benefits to others. So that's, although you're not sitting back and relaxed, you're not being quiet, but yet you can be practicing patience, right? So patience comes in many forms. 4 is perseverance, where you have a zestful vigor for being constructive and not being lazy. And in terms of Buddhism, perseverance here or diligence doesn't mean that you're out there always actively doing something. That's not what it means. A busy person does not mean that he or she is practicing perseverance. But perseverance here is more of trying to maintain mindfulness, to exert an effort to maintain your mind, to exert the effort to maintain your mindfulness. For example, when you exert your effort to avoid greed, anger, and delusion, for example, then you are being persevering. You're observing perseverance because you are exerting some effort. But a person who may be busy, he may be seem very busy, but he is not observing mindfulness. He is just trying to fill his mind with mindless entertainment. Very, very busy doing things, being workaholic, but he's avoiding some other higher, meaningful way of being. And so perseverance here is really to maintain mindfulness and to observe and to motivate yourself towards a higher meaning. So as opposed to just to occupy yourself being busy with mundane stuff like chasing after fame and fortune, for example. Right? A person who may be very busy in chasing after fame and fortune, he may seem very active and busy, but according to Buddhist standard, he is being lazy because he's not observing his mind, he's not observing mindfulness to remove all the mundane stuff, the greed, his anger, his jealousy. So when we practice perseverance, we should be reminded to pursue something of higher meaning, something that's more meaningful that would lead to spiritual liberation. As opposed to being very busy with work, for example, but really behind that is selfishness and fear of losing our position, fear of losing our job, for example. That is not, according to Buddhist standard, that is not perseverance. Right? The fifth perfection is concentration. And concentration here is single-pointedness on any constructive focal object. And the point here is not to be distracted. And concentration here does not mean you just fix on something forever, but whatever that you're shifting your focus on, you stay at task. For example, you're doing your work, and you are focused on doing your work, whether I work at home, but in between you don't distract yourself with watching YouTube videos or checking your text just to distract yourself. When you distract yourself like that, you're not focusing. You don't have that single-pointed focus. So concentration here is not just to fix on one thing and one thing at all, and not knowing anything else around you. But concentration here is to be able to focus on a certain task from beginning to end and not allowing yourself to be easily distracted. Well, it doesn't mean that if there's a fire and you're working on your report or whatever work that you ignore the fire. That's not what it means. But while you're understanding your environment, but at the same time, you are able to concentrate on your work and whatever your task at hand is to completion, right? So concentration here, or meditation, doesn't mean you become oblivious to the outside, but you're fully aware of it, but you are able to concentrate your energy, your mental energy and your emotional energy. For example, you may be concentrated, you may be at work, but then you may not be concentrating according to this definition. How is that? For example, if you're doing your work and you just hate your work and you don't like it, you're being forced to do your work. So you are being divided, right? Your emotional energy is pulling you away from it. You don't want to do this work, but you're doing this work. So physically you are working. So your physical energy is on one point, but then your emotional energy is somewhere else. So that's not concentration. So concentration here in a Buddhist term is to focus all your energies. All your energies become one, right? Your physical energy, your mental energy, your psychological energy, your spiritual energy, you are now absorbed and become one person. So that's concentration, right? So it's more than just putting your head down and work away, but we should understand what are we doing? How are we conforming to the definition of concentration? So when we work on something and we love it, we enjoy it, it's meaningful, right? Your whole being is in it. And that's concentration, and time can pass and you don't feel any tired at all. In fact, might think that maybe it's just been a few minutes, but in fact it's been a few hours, because you are so concentrated, your whole being is one, as opposed to have different personalities, pulling on you, but you are concentrated. You're able to put all your energies together, like all the channels of water, right, flowing, become into one, right? That's concentration. Number 6 is wisdom. Wisdom is a mental factor that makes proper differentiations among phenomena and conditionality. So in Buddhist wisdom, when we achieve concentration and we achieve wisdom, it doesn't mean that we become numb. Some people misunderstand Buddhist meditation with other form of meditation, that they think that when you sit in meditation, you don't think about anything at all. Your mind's completely blank. Well, that is not Buddhist meditation, because by doing that, it does not lead you to wisdom. You don't become numb like a law, right? You are very, you can say, active. You have awareness, but yet is calm and peaceful, right? So wisdom here is you understand what's going on, but you are not being emotionally reacting to it. For example, when you have wisdom, when you learn Buddhism, you have wisdom, you become smarter, but you're not being fooled by the world. There are smart people, but yet they don't have wisdom. For example, when they are smart, they're able to solve problems. Like, for example, in engineering, for an example, they're able to solve a very complicated math problem or come up with a brilliant design that nobody has ever thought of, and they're able to pull that off. But when it comes to their lives, they're full of misery, right? They cannot control their emotions. They get angry, and they suffer under their emotional fluctuation. So even though they're very smart in solving problems, but it comes to something more meaningful, to like living a good life, a happy life, they don't have that control. And that's because they lack wisdom, because they're still being disturbed by the world. So when we study Buddhism, we understand that, this person is good, this person is bad. When you practice Buddhism, doesn't mean that you eliminate all differences and then you've lost your ability to differentiate. You understand that this is a bad person, so you would treat them differently to prevent harm, right? Prevent them from inflicting harm on you or on others. So you don't give them the opportunities to inflict harm. So when we study Buddhism and we have wisdom, it allows us to solve problems. It allows us to know how to treat people properly to prevent harm, right? So that's wisdom. Ability to make proper distinctions, right? The key word here is proper distinctions, because there are differentiations that are not proper. And what are improper differentiations? For example, you differentiate because you have certain bias. Oh, I like this person because he is kind of like me. He has my preferences. He's part of my culture and so forth. So they're differentiation, but that's not proper, because that leads to prejudice. It leads to bias, right? And the 7th is skillful means. When we have wisdom, truly have wisdom, we will have different clever ways to help people. And the reason is here it's skillful as opposed to just any regular means. It's skillful because the implication here is that there is wisdom behind it. There is differentiation behind it. This is skillful, this is not skillful. This is good, this is bad. This is proper, this is improper. So when we have the perfections of skillful means, that we have wisdom to be able to treat a person properly and to allow them to grow. There was a master's in India that Shankaracita was visiting, and he heard about this master. This master, he has different characteristics and very surprising characteristics at times. For example, there will be, in his temple, people would come to his temple, and one of the things he would like to do is collect all the shoes into his rooms and clean them up. He would clean up the soles and clean up, buff up the leather, buff up the shoes, clean them really nice. And the devotees would feel embarrassed, say, Master, you are such a venerable person, not only in society, but in our religious organizations. How can we let you to clean our shoes? We feel very embarrassed. And he would say, well, you come here to have your souls clean, right? Your souls clean. Well, why not? I can help you clean your soul, so I can help you clean your shoes as well, because your shoes are dirty. Your souls are even dirtier. So he was a very kind person, but at times he could be very tough. Like a person, like a high dignitary would come in, and before they came to the door, he would embarrass them because they came thinking that because they are dignity, they think that they come to benefit the temple. But he would embarrass them, would talk back to them, and to a point where that the guest was so embarrassed that they would run away and they would not come. And knowing that how he would treat people because of their arrogance, and that they would come being very humble, and of course, he's not going to fall for that trick. The guest would be humble, but he would become even more humble. So it would put them on a pedestal, ask them for their knowledge, ask them for their advice, to a point where they beg for mercy not to be treated so well. So that's, you can say, a skillful means of helping to remove arrogance. When a person who thinks they're the best, that's arrogance, because of selfish attachments, right? That's egoistic behind it. We can see easily. But a humble person is also an egoistic person, because they see themselves as lower, because there's still a me in it. I am more humble than you, right? There was a story about different religious teachers coming together for a meeting. They say that I'm the best in transcribing texts, scriptures. I'm the best in this, I'm the best in that. And somebody would say, well, you are all the best in it, but when it comes to humbleness, I am the best. So when we say being humble, there is still an element of egoism in it. So therefore, there's still arrogance. It's just the opposite side of the coin. It's the same, right? It's the same arrogance or humbleness. It's really the same coin of egoism. And therefore, what? Yeah. Oh, how do you get rid of those people? Well, first of all, you don't get rid of them, but here's a skillful means, right? When you understand, this person will benefit from this kind of treatment, I shouldn't say treatment, but this kind of handling, then they will benefit more. For example, the person who is very arrogant, that means they are self-confidence. They have a lot of self-confidence. But if you praise them, you will only inflate their egoism. Yeah, so you will find means to talk them down. But a person who is weak already, emotionally weak, if you talk them down on them, you hurt them, right? In that case, you want to praise them to elevate their the self-confidence, self-esteem. But then after they get to a certain point, you just want to stop praising them, right? So that's skillful means. So that requires understanding of how they are people. Yeah, that's right. You have to maintain this balance, right? So this skillful means perfections in skillful means. So we've been talking about the 10 perfections that Mahayanas, Buddhist practitioners, practice. One of those, right, is skillful means. So it's, in other words, what Nagarjuna is saying, that it's very difficult to be self-reliant, because you need to be successful, you need to know how to handle people, and you need to know how to handle yourself. And that's what the difficulty is, right? And so one of those is skillful means of how to handle situations properly without hurting yourselves, without hurting others. Right? And this 8th is aspirational vow, where, yeah. What if there are people who are too sensitive? Well, then that comes back to forbearance, patience, right? Because out of compassion that Buddhas or Buddhas or Bodhisattvas are being patient. They will wait for people to change, right? Don't give up on people, and that's an aspect of Mahayana that's very beautiful. That they don't give up on those who might not see their ways yet, right? So number 8 is aspirational vow, where the vow here is not to have commitment. Commitment to what? Well, commitment to not be parted from bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is enlightenment mind. Bodhicitta is the aim for enlightenment. So we don't give up on the bodhisattvas. Bodhicitta can mean 2 things. One is enlightenment, the other one is compassion. It's very all-encompassing. There is no one word in English that fully describes bodhicitta. But bodhicitta, bodhi is enlightenment, citta is mind, so you can say enlightenment mind. But I'm not talking about emotional mind here. It's really beyond the mind. But it's using mind here just because it's, I guess, that's the best way we can describe it. But when we have this vow, no matter the difficulties, no matter the distractions, we don't give up, right, on reaching our goals to benefit all sentient beings. And it's not very easy to achieve this, because you're trying to help people and people slap you in the face. I don't need your help. Why are you here? Then if we don't have this bodhicitta, we don't have this commitment, we'll give up, say, fine, be on your own, all right? We'll leave. That's not very compassionate. But compassion here doesn't mean that you allow yourself to be stepped on, that you're always there trying to help people, and then people don't like it because you become a pest, right? You don't want to become a pest because you're so compassionate. That's emotional. That's not compassion, right? Because it requires wisdom. Oh, you need it? I'll give it to you. You don't need it? Fine. I have the patience to wait. Because a person who always caters to other people, there's a lack of self-esteem, right? I want attention. I'm here to help you. Pay me attention. And that's what we want to avoid. 9th is strength, a far-reaching strengthening through thorough analysis and meditation, not allowing it to be crushed by countering factors like selfish attachment. So strength here has both thorough analysis and meditation. We understand things clearly, but we are not affected by those things. We're not emotionally affected by those things. You understand clearly that this is beautiful, this is not so beautiful, but you are not being emotionally affected that you have attachment towards something that's beautiful and detesting something that is ugly, that is sore through your eyes. You don't become, you don't have this negative emotions because it's a sore to your eye, right? So that's strength. And then the 10th element, the 10th perfection is deep awareness. And this is discriminating awareness into all phenomena as unsatisfactoriness, impermanence, and insustainability. So these 3 factors here forms, you can call the truth of reality according to Buddhism. To have transcendental awareness, to have wisdom in Buddhism is to see the world in these three terms. So in satisfactoriness, unfortunately, it is often translated as suffering. The original word in Indian language is dukkha, D-U-K-H-A, dukkha. And it is often translated as suffering, but that's not the full meaning of it. It's just an aspect of it. The full meaning of dukkha is unsatisfactoriness, which is a force, if you will, that pushes you towards something better. You have to be satisfied with whatever that you have in order to want to have something else. If you are satisfied with what you have, then there's no need to search for something better. So the whole point of this is really a motivation for us to achieve that something better, something more meaningful, something transcendental. And that is the whole point of this. So when we see reality, in order for us to move from something mundane to transcendental, there needs to be a force behind it to push us forward, correct? And that force is in satisfactoriness, where we are not willing to settle for what we have in the mundane world, but we want something that is more meaningful, right? Unless you're willing to grow, unless you are unhappy and unwilling to move away from your pedestals, you're never going to achieve something higher, right? You sit on your laurels and you're happy with what you achieved, and you never grow. So in Buddhism, it's very positive. It wants us to be better, always be better, and not settle for something that's mundane, but to achieve something that's meaningful, to achieve something that's transcendental, right? And then impermanent is to understand that things are always changing. And impermanent doesn't mean negative. Impermanence doesn't mean that destruction, but impermanence can mean growth. Because when we observe impermanence, we are accepting the potentiality that we can grow for better, right? Because without impermanence, we'll never grow. Without impermanence, we are stuck the way that we are. We're stuck at where we are. And so without impermanence, we're stuck. And some people don't see this truth. Some people say, this is how I am. You tell them, hey, why are you so angry? Why are you always agitated? And their response is, well, this is the way I am. Well, that means they are not seeing the truth. They're not seeing impermanence. They see that this is all they are. This is all they are. They cannot be any better, right? So that's impermanence. So when we see reality, we see the potential for growth, but also the potential for destruction too. Right? Destruction of what? Well, destruction of all the negativity, right? Destructions of selfishness, destruction of greed, jealousy, and those things. And the third element of reality is there's no substance in everything that we encounter through our senses. There is no substance to our anger, because without conditions, we're not angry. Before we were angry, we were not angry, right? After we were done with being angry, we are no longer angry. So anger has no substance. Our happiness is the same thing too, mundane happiness. Before we were happy, where was the happiness? There was no happiness, right? When we were angry, where was that happiness? There was no happiness. But now that we have the happiness, it doesn't mean it will last forever. It's fleeting. Insubstantiality here means that things don't have substance, but doesn't mean that unimportant. For example, let's say a penny, right? I mean, if you see a penny on the floor, will you fight for it? No, you probably wouldn't. You would let it go on the street. But if you only had 99 cents, and that item is sold for $1, that you go to a general dollar store, right? You have only 99 cents. You cannot buy that item that you want. You need that penny, right? Assuming no taxes, okay? Because with taxes, even a penny won't help you. So a penny, even though it's small, but doesn't mean that it's not essential. It's unimportant. So even though we say things are unsubstantial, things are, there's no self in it, things are empty, whatever you want to call it, but it doesn't mean that those things are insignificant. Now, this body is no self, right? This body is insubstantial. But this does not mean that this body is unimportant, because without this body, you have no way of advancing, no way of experiencing the world to elevate you, right? So without the things that we have around us, although they are not real, they are insubstantial, but yet they are essentials in our spiritual development. So when I say insubstantial, it doesn't mean that it's unimportant, insignificant, unnecessary. They are necessary, so we should not discard them. We should see life as precious, but not be precious about it. You following me? Right? We should see life as precious because it's not easy to have this life, but don't be precious about life. Meaning, don't be too emotionally attached that you want everything to come to you, the best to come to you, and if there's anything that does not accord to your satisfaction, you get angry, right? So be precious about life, meaning be grateful of what you have, but don't be demanding. Like, you're following me, right? Okay. So that's deep awareness. Is when we see reality, when we have deep awareness, we have this, and we see the unsatisfactoriness and motivation to be better, and we see impermanence. We see the change for the better, right? We see in other words, we see the change in destruction and construction. Construction of something that's beautiful, destruction of something that's harmful, right? And then we see insubstantiality. Insubstantiality is that we see, we recognize that things come together under conditions, but we don't try to become attached to those things. When we encountering something very positive, we don't become arrogant and become attached, but yet we understand that things will come and go. And we understand conditionalities. In other words, for example, if you want something to grow for the better, you give the proper conditions, right? You give the proper condition. You don't demand things to be how you want things to be, all right? Okay, so those are the 10 perfections. Again, perfections in giving, generous giving, is to create this constructive environment. The perfections in observing precept is to avoid causing harms to others. And perfections in patience is to not be disturbed by those around us in a negative way. And the perfections in perseverance is to always pursue something that's transcendental and not to settle, not to be busy with the mundane things. And the perfection and concentration is to have this focus, meaning that you are all your energies, physical, mental, emotional energies are all in one. You are one person. You are united. And perfection in wisdom is to be able to make proper differentiations among phenomena and conditionality and not to become a dead law. And perfection in skillful mean is to know the appropriate ways to treat people, to help people, right? Whether you are yelling or praising people, at the end, it needs to bring positive results, and that is a skillful means. And perfection aspirational vow here is to have this determination to not be parted from a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is compassion and enlightenment. To not give in, to give up on your pursuit. And perfection and strength here is strengthening ourselves through thorough analysis and meditation. You understand things very clearly, but you're not affected by those things emotionally. You have the strength to maintain your standing, right? And not allow it to be crushed by countering factors like selfish craving. And then lastly, perfections of deep awareness is the ability to see reality through three factors: insatisfactoriness, impermanence, and insubstantiality. Right? Does it make sense? Right? Any comments? Okay. Nagarjuna says, so self-reliance, you have to practice these 10 things, and you also have to practice 4 more, the 4 abodes of mindfulness. I won't go into much detail. We'll go into details next time. I just don't want to digress too much from today's topic. But the 4 abodes of mindfulness, 1 is mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of feeling, mindfulness of mental state, and mindfulness of Dhamma. Most people translate mindfulness of the body as the thinking that this body is ugly, this body is impure, this body is dirty. But that is just one factor of it. That's not the complete understanding of mindfulness of the body. Mindfulness of the body here is to understand conditionality. Why do we have this body? And what can we do to prevent having this mundane body? Right? Because with this body, you face a lot of pain and suffering. So we understand the causes for the pain and suffering, and we understand the causes for not encountering pain and suffering. Does it make sense? I should say differently. When we have this body, mindfulness body, and we have wisdom, we know how to live a happy life. It's not to run away from misery. It's not to run away from all problems or challenges. But when we have wisdom, we know how to live because we understand conditionalities. We understand the conditions that will bring a happy life. Right? We understand the conditions that will cause a suffering life. We understand the conditions leading to a transcendental state. So when we study Buddhism, we have wisdom. We understand when we study mindfulness of the body, it is to teach us how to live a happy life by understanding the conditions, what lead to what. Does it make sense? Okay. Second is the mindful. The law of cause and effect is, you can say yes, the law of cause and effect. So cause and effect, but then in between is missing one component, which is conditionality, because cause without conditions would not lead to effect. So they said it to simplify the concept, but to fully say it properly is cause, condition, and effect, right? But cause and effect is, if you understand what it means, but sometimes we want to say all three just to not avoid confusing other people, because when we say cause and effect, it can lead to a misunderstanding that if you have cause, you will have an effect, which is not true. Let's say you have a seed, and you have no water, you're not planting, you're not putting effort in it, it will never grow into fruit or tree, right? Tree, fruit represents effect. Seed represents cause. But you say law of cause and effect, some people will misunderstand to say, when you do something, you're going to have some effect, which is not true, because without the conditions, you will never have an effect. Does it make sense? All right, okay. But when we say the law of conditionality, that's another term for cause, conditionality, and effect. Yeah, yeah. Mhm. And mindfulness of the feeling is to understand your feeling, your sensations, to be aware of your sensations. And mindfulness of the mental states, and that is your cognition, the knowing. You know, for example, if I were to ring a bell, even though you don't hear, you know it is a bell. You know, so because that knowing. And then fourth is mindfulness of Dhamma, which is the mindfulness of metaphysical phenomena, things that have in your mind, like your intentions. So that's the difference between mental states and the Dhamma is really your mentality, your mental, your intentions. Okay? So Nagarjuna says, if you want to study, you want to take on the self-reliant path, you have to practice those things. And those things are not easy, right? That's why they're difficult. The other path is self-reliance on others, and the easier path, and that is to leverage Bodhisattvas and Buddha's compassions. In his work, he mentions of Maitreya Buddha and Amida Buddha. Maitreya Buddha actually, he's a Bodhisattva, not a Buddha yet. And he, according to Buddhist scriptures, he is currently in the Tasita heaven, right? The Tasita heaven. And he's waiting for the time, the opportunities to descend to earth to help sentient beings. And then he will be consecrated as a legitimate successor of Shakyamuni Buddha. So he will be the next Buddha in this world to preach the Dhamma to gods and men. And he is the only Bodhisattva who enjoys the distinctions of being the only one to be worshipped today in Theravadan countries, as well as Mahayana religious practice. In other words, Mahayana, Theravada both accept Maitreya being a legitimate Bodhisattva. Theravada does not accept other Bodhisattvas, other Buddhas. Theravadas, they only accept Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya Bodhisattva. Whereas Mahayana accepts both their teaching, Theravada's teachings, as well as their own teachings, obviously. So in other words, they accept all Bodhisattvas and Bodhisattvas and Buddhas in the 10 directions, right? So that's one figure of worship. The second figure of worship is Amitabha. Amitabha attained his supreme Buddhahood eons ago. So the whole setup of this is how does Amitabha come about? Well, we know of Amitabha Buddha from 3 sutras, right? The Infinite Life Sutras and the visualizations on Infinite Life Sutras, and the smaller text, the Amida Sutra, which is the sutra that we've been discussing. And in the Infinite Life Sutra, now an important section is on the 48 vows. I'm not sure why Shankaracita said 49, but then later on he mentions 48. But some texts do have other numbers than 48 because they combine vows into one, some separate out. So I guess it's based on the translator. But anyways, he made the vows under the Buddha Lokesva Raja. Raja means king, and Lokesva means Loka here means the world. I guess here Vara is like freedom. And so a person who is free, a king of being free in the world. But anyways, some people think that he is just purely a transcendental figure, that he is a myth, Amitabha, just a myth. And to his worshippers, Amitabhas, Buddhahood itself, he is Buddhahood itself in the most beautiful and adorable form, conceived by the human heart. And his wisdom and compassions are not only in the fullness, but also in overflowing way as well. And because of his infinite love or infinite loving kindness, right? But according to Occidental scholarships, Amitabha is a myth, probably of Central Asian or Iranian origin, because for what historical evidence is there that he ever existed. And so that's why he is considered for some people as a myth. And Shankaracharya tries to answer this question or this doubt. Yeah, one way of him looking at it is that such a view to see Amitabha as a myth fails to take account of the distinction between empirical truth of reason and poetic truth of imagination. So whether Amitabha did ever live upon the earth as a human being is irrelevant. I mean, we can go through his rationale, but it's not very satisfactory to me, and I'll offer my own view to contrast it. But let's continue. He said that what's really important here is the intentions, the figure of Amitabha, and how it and the representations in this systems of faith and devotion. And he said that this is an attempt not to convince the head, but to move the heart. And that's why it's taking in the form of a myth in order to try to produce something that goes beyond the physical. Physical, something that's physical cannot fully illustrate it. And that's why they have to go through this metaphysical realm, this mystical realm in order to illustrate it. And so he said that since the heart is moved much more powerfully by a myth than by an argument, therefore they wanted to create this myth because mythical is more powerful than historical, or poetry is more powerful than logic. And that's very true, because we are moved by something that is emotional. We are not really moved by logic. Right? The fact that how we buy things emotionally driven, right? We have choices between an iPhone and a Samsung, right? And even though Samsung logically costs less, may have more features, allows you that external slot to increase your memory, but you invariably would choose the iPhone because it's more attractive. It's something you can relate to. You think it's safer, whatever it is, right? You have reasons to buy something that you like and not necessarily logical. So in other words, if you can get to your emotions, you can change yourself very easily, right? Okay. So that's what he's trying to say here. So Nagarjuna was a transposition from the dogmatic to logic mode, and from intellectual mode into emotional. So it's going from dogmatic, just to accept a doctrine without thinking, to logical mode to have wisdom, and then from that wisdom, from intellectual into emotional. So that's essentially the progress. And then another point of view that Shankaracharya offer is on the fact that you cannot use science to verify this, something that is so cosmic, in vastness, cosmic vastness, and so you have to use something poetic, mythical in order to illustrate it. So that's another justifications offered by Shankaracharya, because this is so vast, it's infinite space and infinite time, and it's very cosmic in dimensions. And that's why you have to take this mythical dimension in order to try to understand it. So that's his offering. But I'm not very satisfied with this explanation. So I will offer another view to try to compensate it, right? Another view is that if there is a world of tribulation, a world full of afflictions, 烦恼, a world full of suffering can exist, like the ones that we have, a lot of disasters can exist, then certainly a world of pure happiness can also exist. Why not, right? If LA, Mr. Chen always tells us this analogy, if LA, city of LA can exist, then city of New York can exist, right? Because things are all driven by conditions. The conditions for tribulations are greed, anger, selfishness, jealousy. The conditions for pure happiness is transcendental, no compassion, no self, no selfish craving, right? So if we have this world, why not the other world, right? A world mundane that is full of greed, anger, and delusion will create a world of suffering, a world of the noble, right? The people who are noble with perfect good roots, merits, virtues, and conditions will create Sukhavati, right? The Western Pure Land, right? If we deny Sukhavati, then we are certainly denying earth. If we can accept earth, why not accept the possibility of Sukhavati? If we are willing to only accept earth but not Sukhavati, then aren't we being biased in our thinking, right? We are being biased. We only accepting on one side and not consider the possibility of the other side. Last discussions, we talked about Tomo Geshe Rinpoche. He was a very interesting figure, very reverend figure in Tibetan Buddhism. When he was walking in the countryside, there was a wonderful phantasmagoria in the skies of Maitreya Bodhisattva appearing in the skies with his retinues of followers. And there were flowers, lotus-like, falling from the skies, and they were real enough for people to handle and to pick up. But then after half an hour, they melted into the sky. And if those phenomena, could last for a few hours and witnessed by hundreds of people, and that was in the late 1930s, why not for centuries and seen by millions, right? So Sukhavati is a land of pure happiness can exist. If we can accept that this place, a place of tribulations, a place of suffering can exist, then certainly Sukhavati can exist, right? Okay. But if we were to look at this myth, okay, let's accept it. Let's say it is a myth. Does it make it invalid? Certainly not. So how can we use this myth? How do we understand the myth of Amitabha and Sukhavati? Right? How should we understand this myth? By myth here, I don't mean that that does not exist. By myth here is that we should understand this, that we should not wait until we are reborn in Sukhavati in order to practice Buddhism. By myth here is that we should remind ourselves, this is a myth, yes, and it is a myth to tell us to live our lives in full awareness and not in delusion. Because the myth here is that in Chinese it's probably better to call it li, which is ideal. And in true reality, everything is a myth. Everything, right? Everything is insubstantial. In true reality, nothing exists in true reality. But how we understand the myth of Amitabha and Sukhavati is to understand the meaning of it. Amitabha, what does Amitabha mean? Means not. Mita means limit or limited. So Amita means unlimited. And Ba here is short for Buddha, which represents enlightenment. So when we believe in Amitabha, we are believing in this unlimited enlightenment, that we can achieve this unlimited enlightenment. And in this myth, in true reality, it is a myth in a sense that there is no duality. In other words, Sukhavati is not separated from earth. Earth is not different from Sukhavati. Just like the saying, we are Amitabha, and Amitabha is us, right? Because we have the same ability to achieve what Dhammakara, which is a monk who became Amitabha, which we'll talk in a little bit, had achieved. So how we should understand this myth is, yes, we can accept Amitabha and Sukhavati as a myth from the perspective of true reality. Right? From the perspective of true reality, everything is a myth. Nothing exists. We are conditionally existing. We don't truly exist, because if we were truly existing, we would never die. We would never change. The fact that we change, meaning that there's no substance in what we have, right? But so when we see Amitabha and Sukhavati as a myth, is that we should not have this dream of waiting to be reborn in Sukhavati in order to live our lives. We can live a happy life now. We don't have to wait until we get to Sukhavati, the Western Pure Land, in order to have a happy life. And so when we understand this as a myth, is that we should live a happy life now, like the best that we can, just like Sukhavati, right? So how do we live this life? How does the Buddha teaching us to live a life and not wait until we die to go to Sukhavati? Well, there are 3 sutras that we've been talking about, and it gives us guidance of how to live. The Buddha is not saying, don't do anything, just wait until you die and you go to my land and you'll be free. But the Buddha is saying you can be free now. Don't wait until you get there to have happiness, but you can have happiness now. In the Amida Sutra, the smaller text that we are studying now, it says to cultivate good roots, merits, virtues, and provide the proper conditions, to have the proper conditions, right? And then Infinite Life Sutras, it says to cultivate merits, to observe the precepts. And in the visualizations on Infinite Life Sutras, how we should live our life should be based on the threefold goodness, which we'll go into details after this. So from the perspective of the absolute truth, Sukhavati is a dream. Everything is empty. Earth is a dream because nothing is fixed, nothing is unchanging. But by myth, it doesn't mean that Sukhavati doesn't exist. Does it make sense? Right? It exists conditionally. It does not exist unconditionally. Under unconditionality, where nothing exists, but under conditionality, Earth and Sukhavati do exist. They exist conditionally, right? But given all that, Earth, the realm of suffering is full of suffering. There's nothing desirable about it. But Sukhavati is a place of bliss. Whether it's a dream, a myth or not, we are experiencing suffering now. It's like a nightmare. So which one would you rather have? Sukhavati, a sweet dream, which is a dream, is a sweet dream. The Saha world, the world that we're in, the world of tribulation, is a nightmare. What would you rather choose? Wouldn't you rather choose a sweet dream over a nightmare? Even though Sukhavati is a dream, but it's a sweet dream. Why not choose a sweet dream over a nightmare, right? It just makes sense to choose that, to choose Sukhavati. And Sukhavati is empty. It doesn't exist. I mean, it's empty. It is because it's always changing. It's changing in a spiral way, spiral growth. It's changing from happiness to rapture, to joy, to bliss, to equanimity. Whereas in our Saha world, it's also changing too, but it's in oscillation. Forever oscillation between joy and suffering. Right? We have joy, and then at some point we feel unhappy. And then after we feel unhappy, we come to our senses, we collected ourselves together, we're motivated to do something better, and then we're happy again. So it oscillates between happiness and suffering. Whereas in Sukhavati, it's changing too, but in a spiral way. It's changing in a spiral way, you will. So when we say Sukhavati when we ask, is Sukhavati a myth? Yes, it is a myth. And we ask again, is Sukhavati a myth? No, it's not a myth. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Right? Okay, any comments? Right. Okay. Okay, so where are the sources of Amitabha? How do we come to know of Amitabha? The chief sources of Amitabha are the larger and the smaller Sukhavati Vyuha sutras. So that's the Infinite Life Sutras, Amida Sutras. And then the third sutra is on the meditations on Buddha of Infinite Life. 观无量寿经, right? Wang Vo Lung Tao Gen. So those are the three primary sources of Amitabha. Right? So we have been talking about Nagarjuna transforming Buddhism. Even though he is known for logic and wisdom in his work, but there is also another important factor of it, which is devotion, devotional Buddhism. And so we've been talking about the easy path and the difficult path. The difficult path is, in Nagarjuna's book, to practice the 10 perfections and the 4 abodes of mindfulness. And the easier path is to rely on the compassions of Amitabha. And we've been talking about whether about the doubt of whether Amitabha is the myth or not. And we've gone through that rationale of it. Now we will talk about the sources of Amitabha. Who is Amitabha, and how did he come about? Another challenge here before we move on. So another challenge for Mahayana is that Theravada Pali scriptures, Theravada does not accept Mahayana. They think that Mahayana's scriptures are falsified because written not by somebody else later on and not through the Buddha. And that was their claim. Well, they say that because if you know, the Buddha gave Dharma talks, right, throughout his life, but after about 600 years, some people say 400, 500, 600 years, but after a long time, then his words started to be written down. So that separation was a long period of time, of a few hundred years before things were written down. Theravada justify, well, the Pali scriptures belong to the Buddha. The Buddha said it because the Pala, their work had been orally transmitted, and that's their claim for continuation. Whereas they say Mahayana's scriptures just sprang out later on after the Buddha. So Theravada had this, their Pali scriptures belong to, they call Tipitaka, which is like 3 baskets of sutras, precepts, and commentaries, right? And modern Theravadins maintain that during this period, the traditions subsequently recorded in Tipitakas were transmitted orally. So there's no discontinuation. They're saying it's true from what the Buddha says, even though it was not recorded in writing, but it was recorded orally, right, transmitting from one person to another. And that's their claim of continuation. And that may be true, but Shankaracharya says, well, if that's the case, then what was there to prevent the teachings contained in the Infinite Life Sutra being transmitted orally too? Because these sutras belong to Mahayana. You cannot find this sutra in the Pali text. It's in Sanskrit. So Pali is much older. Sanskrit is later on, because the fact that it was written in transcript, some scholars argue that it was not authentic, that it must have been written later on because the Buddha did not use such language, right? It was not used Sanskrit, but he used Pali, I guess. So he said, well, if the Theravada text could be transmitted orally, then why not Mahayana's text, right? He says, were retentive memories a monopoly of the Hinayana? So that the same line of argument for which establishes the authenticity of the Pali text can be utilized to establish the authenticity not only of the Infinite Life Sutra but of any other Mahayana sutra in Sanskrit. If things could be transmitted orally for 500 years, then certainly things could also be transmitted for 1,000 years, right? So the scriptures of Buddhism stand or fall together. So people cannot say this is authentic, this is not, because any attempt to prove on textual grounds that one set of tradition is more authentic than the other, it's likely going to come back and bite them. See? Okay, so we should rest assured that the Infinite Life Sutra is authentic. And that's the whole argument that Shankaracharya is trying to make. Okay, and so in his book he goes into the story of Amitabha, and I try to correlate this to the Chinese text and also Vietnamese version as well. So I've done cross-correlation just to make sure we have the same understanding and something that we're familiar with. And also to double-check his work too. So here's the start of the Infinite Life Sutra. I probably won't be able to finish this given that we have about 10 minutes left, but we'll pick it up next time. We'll start what we have and then we'll pick up again next time. In the first two chapters, it's of the sutras, talks about the Dharma assembly of the noble Sangha, here with the monks, bhikkhus, as well as bodhisattvas. Another point that Shankaracharya pointed out, and I never thought about this before, was that in the sutra, beginner sutras, it listed all the monks, the top disciples, name by name, whereas when it came to bodhisattvas, they only listed the leaders, the bodhisattva leaders. In other words, this text is very old. The fact that they put more focus on the names of the monks as opposed to bodhisattvas, that's leaning towards the earlier time of Buddhism. Theravadas did not recognize Buddhas or bodhisattvas other than Shakyamuni Buddha and Maitreya. But so here, the fact that they put more focus on the monks, meaning this is a very old text. Does it make sense? Right? So that's another point of to look at the sutra being very old, and it's not something created later on. And then the following on chapters, the reasons for the great teaching. Why did the Buddha preach this sutra? And that was because of Ananda, he was Buddha's personal attendant for, I think, 20 years. During that time, he had never seen the Buddha appearing so radiant, so beautiful. That caught him by surprise, and so he asked, Shakyamuni Buddha, why you look so radiant? I've never seen you look like this before. Are you contemplating about any particular Buddha, a Buddha in the past, a present Buddha, and perhaps maybe some Buddha in the future? And that's where the Shakyamuni Buddha talked about his contemplations and the reason why he was thinking about that particular Buddha. And that particular Buddha was nobody other than Amitabha. And he said that long time ago, during a time, there was a Buddha that came into existence with the name of Lokesvara Raja, right? We just talked about him earlier, mentioned about him earlier. And and there was a monk called Dhammakara. Dhammakara was a monk under this Lokesvara Raja, Buddha. And through the learning under this Buddha, he cast vows. He was motivated to become a Buddha himself. So he asked for guidance from this. He asked guidance from Lokesvara Raja. He wanted to create a Buddha land himself. And so he asked for the Buddha's advice, and the Buddha used his magical power to display all the qualities of different Buddha lands in the universe for him to observe, for him to create this ideal Buddha country, the Buddha land. And after observing that, he received instructions from the Buddha, and Dhammakara spent 5 kalpas mentally concentrating all the Buddha countries to form into his own, and not only to form a Buddha country, but a Buddha country that is, here says 81 times, but infinitely more noble and excellent than all the other Buddha lands. One explanation from this, the meaning of this is, what does it mean more beautiful? This is more beautiful in a sense of going there and achieving Buddhahood easily, so the easy path, right? And then from there, he came back to his teacher, and he had this vows that he wanted his teachers to listen to, and that's what came about of the 48 vows, and became the basis of the Pure Land teaching, the 48 vows. And of the 48 vows, the most important of all is the 18, which Genko, a Japanese monk, he called this the king of the vows. And the 18 vows here says that those who believe in me with joyful faith, with serene thoughts, and if they wish to be born in my country, they can repeat my names 10 times and they'll be reborn, right? And here's a Chinese and the Vietnamese translation of it. And should that not be true, I would not be a Buddha. So he is making his country, Buddha land, contingent on this vow, the realization of this vow. So now that Amitabha has become a Buddha, this vow can be realized. And then there's another vow here, number 20, and he says that after hearing my name, they should direct their thoughts towards my country, Sukhavati, and they plant good roots with their serene thoughts. They wish to be born in my country. They will be satisfied with that wish. If not, then I will not attain perfect knowledge. And then perfect accomplishments here, that he did become a Buddha, and through his cultivations, and he did attain supreme enlightenment. And okay, and then he realized his vows, in other words. Okay, and then after 48 vows, received miraculous assurance from the Buddha, his teachers, that Dhammakara would become a Buddha. But before he became a Buddha, it was not instant. It was like he created vows and he became a Buddha. No, he had to go through his practice of performing the duties of a bodhisattva for a long period of time. Here says hundreds, thousands, of long period of time. And following the threefold path of morality, meditation, and wisdom, whether they were born rich or poor, beautiful or ugly, it's because of the law of cause and effect. Right? Dhammakara fulfilled his duties as a bodhisattva, that merits start to flourish, where whatever he went, riches would spring to meet him, and then his mouth breathed forth a perfume of excellency, and his head was redolent of scent of lotus, and foods and drinks streamed from his palms. So he was had no worries about food and drinks. So let me finish this, and then we'll end, and we pick it up from there. Ananda asked the Buddha whether the Amitabha had already achieved Buddhahood in the past, the present, or the future. And the Buddha tells Ananda that Dhammakara had attained enlightenment as the Tathagata's Amitabha, and continuing, the Blessed One declares that the light and life of Amitabha are immeasurables, right? 无量寿, 无量寿, 无量光, right? 无量光, 无量头. His life is immeasurable. But then and he adds that only 10 kalpas have elapsed since he arose and awoke to the highest perfect knowledge. Okay, so now we come to the point where Dhammakara has become Amitabha. Okay, all right, we will stop here for now. We'll pick it up. I have much more interesting information to share with you, and to illustrate how this is all relating to our practice and how it can help us to make progress. Right? So quickly review, we talk about today the easy path and the difficult path, and some people may think that this is a myth, and we shouldn't have to argue, because it depends on how you look at it. From the absolute perspective, absolute truth, everything is a myth, but it does not mean it's insignificant, because we can still use it, just like a penny. A penny is small in amount, but it is not insignificant, because without it, you will not be able to have $1 and 100 cents, right? So in other words, we should appreciate life, but don't be too precious about it. Maintain that balance, right? And even though it's a myth, but to us, it's not a myth, because we still are depending on our senses. We're still being affected by our nightmares, our dreams, our feelings. Therefore, it is more worthwhile to be affected by good, positive feelings than to encounter sufferings day in, day out, right? So it is good for us to make that distinction without discriminating knowledge, to make the proper choice. That will lead to a better future than to be stuck in this cyclic, oscillating, oscillation between happiness and joy that we get stuck in, as opposed to spiral development, spiral growth that leads to things better than the one before it, right? Okay, so we'll pick up next time. Are there any comments before we end? Okay. All right, let's do a quick merit dedication, then we can end. If you could please join your palms, together we recite. May the merits and virtues accrue today adorn the Buddha Pure Lands, repay 4 types of kindness above, and aid those suffering in the paths below. May those who see and hear of this bring forth the resolve for the Bodhi mind. When this retribution body is complete, together we shall meet in the land of ultimate bliss. If you could please rise and we bow to the Buddha 3 times to show our respect. First bow, second bow, and third bow. 阿弥陀佛。